Hi everyone, today I'm here with Dr. Meyer, and a local gastroenterologist who's been practicing in the field for over 40 years. And so thank you, Dr. Meyer, for being part of the interview.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So before we go into more in depth about the field, could you give us a brief overview of what gastroenterology is, the cases it involves, and just a brief overview of it?
It's hard to do that briefly, but gastroenterology is anything that goes in here, comes out here, and is in the abdomen, pretty much.
Okay, so what are the most common cases that you see in practice?
Well, these days, probably gastroesophageal reflux disease is one of the most common things that we see, with the Americans being overweight and not really paying attention to their eating habits. I think people tend to have a little bit more GERD than we used to. Although I remember when I was growing up, my father would go through a bottle of Sodaments in a week. I'm sure he had terrible gastroesophageal reflux, but no one diagnosed it as such at the time. Clearly, liver disease is a big deal. We had an epidemic of people using intravenous and intranasal narcotics and sharing needles or straws and getting hepatitis B and hepatitis C. So the problem with hepatitis C is for 20 years or so you never knew you had it. You never got jaundice the way you did with acute hepatitis A or B. You just kind of all of a sudden you started having symptoms suggesting you had cirrhosis. And then the complication of that, of course, is liver cancer. And now in the 21st century, as Americans get bigger and bigger, we are seeing more fatty liver, and consequently, fatty liver is going to be the most common cause of liver cancer. I think liver disease is going to be a big issue in gastroenterology over the next 50 years or so. Liver transplantation is going to be big. And then inflammatory bowel disease, I think, are probably for the lower GI. Maybe diverticular disease also, but those are I think are the big ones.
Gastroenterology is a subspecialty of internal medicine, and are there further specializations in gastroenterology, or does everyone cover everything?
In gastroenterology, some people just focus on liver disease. So there's just hepatology by itself. Most general gastroenterologists do general GI as well as hepatology, but hepatology is a subspecialty. People do subspecialties in inflammatory bowel disease, mostly Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. There are people who do extra endoscopy, so they do much more invasive endoscopy, endoscopic ultrasound, biopsies with ultrasound. That takes probably about an extra year. ERCP, endoscopic retrograde cholangiopancreatography, at one point, and for some places, takes an extra year, so you can be a specialist in ERCP. But a lot of GI fellows will get that in their last year, and so can go straight into that.
What would a typical day in the life of a gastroenterologist be like, from like around the time you come in to like when you leave?
I've had lots of different careers. One was in the Air Force for 23 years, and I was an administrator part of that time, but then I worked for Kaiser more recently, and then I've done some locums. And I think the general gastroenterologist will do about a half day of seeing patients in the clinic and a half day of doing procedures. I think that's kind of a typical day. And if you're on call, then you may have less responsibilities in one or the other, so you have time to see the patients in the hospital and then bring those patients down to do procedures.
And what are the hours like?
I think it's going to depend on the style of the individual programs that you're with. If you worked for Kaiser in the 20th century, you could count on, during your workday, 8, maybe 9 hours in the hospital, in the clinic. And if you were on call, then it just depended on how much emergency stuff there was at night and on the weekends. But if you had a group of 10 gastroenterologists, you were only on call about once every other week. So I think on the average, depending upon how aggressive the individual or the individual's group is, 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, is reasonable.
How is the lifestyle of a gastroenterologist different from that of other specialties?
When you talk about the lifestyle, one of the problems with the American medical system is that the primary care doctors, pediatricians, internists, family practitioners don't do procedures, and proceduralists make a lot more money doing procedures in the same amount of time that the generalist is working. So they both work the same amount of time. The gastroenterologist in particular will make 2-3 times more money, so that allows you to do more things. And if you have a big debt, and I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of young people go into the specialties like dermatology, gastroenterology, maybe cardiology, although I understand that may not be so lucrative, is because they make more money and their lifestyle can be a lot more comfortable. Not to say that general internists or general pediatricians or family practice don't have a reasonable lifestyle, but I think making more money allows you to do more things. And I'm not advocating for internal medicine making, subspecialists making more money, but I am advocating that the primary care people should be making more, and those people doing specialties less.
Did you stick with mostly clinical work, or did you do non-clinical work as well? You mentioned you did some administrative work in the Air Force, right? Air Force. And later on in your career, when you started working like at Kaiser, for example, did you start doing more like policy work or research work or other things like that, or do you stick mostly to clinical work?
At Kaiser, I did mostly clinical work. I had a couple of my colleagues who had time that they were able to do research with. One primarily doing stuff with hepatitis, one doing and doing some stuff with inflammatory bowel disease, and another one doing research with colon cancer in particular.
How would you recommend a new physician who's out in the workforce pursue other kind of activities besides clinical work? Would you just work with administration to try to protect some time, or how would you arrange that?
Yeah, and a lot depends on your work situation. If you're working for a university, many times they will give you time to do research because that brings in notoriety, it brings in some money for the university. If you're working for a group, the group often is much more interested in your making money than in doing research. But they also recognize that if you're doing significant research and you're getting publications, it brings attention to the group, so that's beneficial as well. If you're in private practice, a solo private practice, you set up your own things, doing it the way you want to do it, however it is you want to do it.
So employment types for gastroenterologists, seems like everything's moving towards working like bigger groups. Are there opportunities still to work in like doing locum tenens work, or doing like working as like a solo practitioner?
If you're looking for work, I get so many phone calls in a week asking me to go all over the United States to do locums work. So that's certainly a possibility. And in fact, I'd actually recommend to a person coming out of training to do locums for a year or two to get a good look at what practices do, locations to see where you might want to live, because so many young people make a deal right out of their residency or fellowship program, last 3 or 4 years, and find out that really wasn't what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But there's plenty of opportunity out there in gastroenterology.
Mm-hmm. Would you recommend that same thing of doing locums work right out of residency or fellowship for any specialty, or is that mostly gastroenterology?
No, I think I'd recommend it for almost anyone. General internal medicine, pediatrics, family practice, specialties, subspecialties. Especially if you're not sure where you want to work or what you want to do. Mm-hmm. It gives you a good idea of what's going on. But if you're married and have kids, it's much harder to do that. Mm-hmm. But it's still something that would be something I'd recommend.
Yeah. What's the most challenging aspect of gastroenterology?
I think the most challenging aspect of almost all medicine is keeping up. Mm-hmm. There's so much being done. Mm-hmm. So much work being published, and trying to keep up with what's current, I think is probably the hardest part of not just gastroenterology, but probably all of medicine. And
what have you found to be most effective for keeping up on top of that?
Well, part of it has to do with how much time you're working. If you have time off to read, time off to do research, you're going to stay sort of focused pretty well in the area that your interest is in. And many people subspecialize even more. For instance, in gastroenterology, some people do inflammatory bowel disease. Some people do esophagus. And if you focus on that and you only read in that area, you kind of lose your skills in the other areas, but you are a super specialist in the thumbnail of the thumb of the right hand of the arm of you can make that almost absurd. There's plenty of work out there for people who want to specialize in certain areas.
What was the most rewarding aspect of your field?
I think one of the most rewarding aspects for me has been to focus on areas that other people aren't interested in. Unusual causes of abdominal pain. Abdominal wall pain is a particular interest of mine. And with a proper diagnosis and a trigger point injection with xylocaine and triamcinolone, you can make someone's chronic abdominal pain go away. I've also enjoyed taking care of patients who have cyclic vomiting because most gastroenterologists aren't terribly interested in cyclic vomiting because you can't scope it. But if you put them on tricyclics at adequate doses, you make a lot of them better. And the most fun in medicine is getting a complicated disease in a patient where you can make a diagnosis that no one else has and make the patient better.
Kind of like Sherlock Holmes type of
deal. Well, that's what medicine is, isn't it?
Why did you end up choosing medicine, and what was your path to gastroenterology?
I refuse to answer on the grounds it may tend to incriminate me. My reasons for going into gastroenterology are not atypical, I think. A lot of people go into a specialty or a subspecialty based on someone they admired in that area. And when I was a resident, one of my attendings was just 1 year older than I, but he was brilliant. And he influenced a lot of people to go into gastroenterology. And that was a time before we really had endoscopy. Endoscopy was just getting started. Medical school is a different story. I won't tell you. I won't tell you how I got interested in medical school. On the record, I'll tell you later.
Okay. So, are there certain personalities that do best in gastroenterology?
I don't think so. I think the best doc is going to be someone who shows caring about the patient, what the patient is, and trying to make the patient better. And I think that's the general answer to everything. I don't know of a particular. Nowadays, if you were a specialist in endoscopic mucosal resection through the endoscope. You were really particularly good at that. You're good technically, I think that's fine. But I still think you need to have good bedside manner.
So probably like communicating well and things like that.
Yeah.
I know it's been a while since you applied to residency or
Just a couple
fellowship. What general tips would you give us to match into a good residency or fellowship program?
Obviously, good grades and good recommendations are important. I think so many medical students applying for residencies and fellowships are about the same level. So what's going to distinguish you from someone else? And I think having an interest or some special thing that you do that distinguishes you from others is important. And I think any medical student who has a poster is going at a medical meeting is going to have a little bit of advantage of someone who is the same level, done everything the same, doesn't have a poster. Someone who's got a paper published in a national journal is going to have an edge on someone who's only done one poster. And someone who has a paper that is in the New England Journal of Medicine is going to have an advantage, or the joint JCI, Journal of Clinical Investigation. So there's some things that I think can separate you out a little bit. I interview for my alma mater, MIT, from time to time, and you know, all these young people applying to MIT are really good, and they're really smart. But if you've rode crew as a high school student, or you're nationally ranked in tennis or squash, that makes you a little bit different. You know, it gets their attention, puts you in a different category, gives you an advantage. I remember when my son was applying for college, the guy who was the admissions director for Bowdoin College in Maine, where it's dark this time of year. I mean, sun sets at 3 and doesn't come up till 10, so you have this dark, gloomy campus. The first 4 people they recruited were hockey goalies. Because if the hockey team were having a bad year, the whole campus was in a bad mood. So, you know, look for that edge. And I think that's the key. That's the difference.
Okay. And so you mentioned, onto finances, you mentioned for physician compensation, gastroenterologists are compensated pretty well compared to other specialties.
Overpaid.
Overpaid. Are there any tips you'd recommend for new doctors to manage their finances better, or things that they could do to maximize their finances or their income?
One of the problems now, as you well know, is the average medical student graduating from medical school has got about $200,000 worth of debt. That should not, just because you graduate from medical school, does not mean you should go out and buy yourself a brand new BMW. It's interesting. I was reading the newspaper the other day. Someone was having financial issues, and that was one of the things. You know, this is a guy who's graduating from college. He's got $25,000 in the bank. He saved well. Should I buy a new car or what? And the guy says, look, as soon as you drive that car off the lot, it loses 20% of its value. Buy yourself a good second-hand car for $11,000 rather than a brand new one for $25,000 or $30,000. Don't take on debt that you don't need. You know, just because you graduated from medical school and you don't have to take a trip around the world business class. But some people do that. You know, the one of the reasons we had the financial problems we had in 2007, 2008, 2009, the people overspending their credit cards, refinancing their houses, and taking the money and paying off their credit card, and then overspending their credit cards again. Live within your budget. Don't spend more than you make.
So basically for managing your finances well, you recommended living under your means or within your means.
Under's better. Put away 10%.
Put away 10%.
Before you do anything else, put away 10%.
Mm-hmm.
When you go out for a job, maximize the amount of money you put into retirement.
Mm-hmm. And then, do you recommend investing in certain things?
I don't recommend investing in anything. I've learned over the years that doctors are not very good with money.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a doc in St. Louis who's, I think, a cardiologist who's written a couple of books about investing and physician investing.
Mm-hmm.
And basically he says the same thing I said. Docs don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Find a good advisor and let that person do it.
Mm-hmm.
I've done everything wrong that guy wrote about in his book.
Mm-hmm.
And as a resident, I used to listen to my attendings make the same stupid mistakes. Try and find ways they could quadruple their money without doing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Put your money in the Fortune 500 and just leave it alone.
Mm-hmm. So probably delegate that to an advisor instead of doing it yourself.
Yeah, but then you got to make sure that your advisor knows what the hell
Mm-hmm.
he or she's doing. Because I've had 3 or 4 advisors who are friends
Mm-hmm.
who didn't do any better than I did. Again, I think the smartest thing to do. And so I worked for Kaiser for a little while, and I worked for Sutter for a little while, and they have their own team that manages those finances.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been lucky for the last 8 years or so. I have to, because I'm over 70 and a half, I have to take an obligatory set amount of money from my account
Mm-hmm.
each end of the year or beginning of the year. And each year, at the end of that 12-month period, my money's back up to where it was
Mm-hmm.
when they gave me my money from the previous year.
Mm-hmm.
So I've still been at this level, and I haven't done anything. So the people investing that
Mm-hmm.
really supposedly know what they're doing and seem to be doing a really good job maintaining.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were to say something to someone, first thing I'd say is, if you're working for a group, maximize the amount of money you put into your retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And maximize what the company will match.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to do any investing, Fortune 500, unless the bottom drops out of the real estate market and then buy something inexpensively.
Mm-hmm. There's supposed to be another dip.
Oh, there's got to be. We're close to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen in the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal hope is it will happen in July of 2020.
I was hoping it'd happen after I had some capital, but
well, yeah, maybe, yeah. Well, it's one of the things you have to understand is it's going to happen after you've had some capital.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like we go into these 8 or 10 year growth cycles and continue going forever.
Mm-hmm.
Young people don't understand that, and they start going into margin and throwing money in places where it shouldn't be,
Mm-hmm.
and the bottom drops out. I mean, it's what happened in 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
These people thought it was going to go on forever. Their house was going to keep getting, and they were going to be able to spend all the money they wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
and then they got underwater.
Mm-hmm.
Their house was not worth the amount of money they had in their mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So the house was worth $200,000. They had $300,000 mortgage because the bottom dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were stupid. Live within your means.
Mm-hmm.
Put 10% away or maximize. If you're by yourself, 10% away. If you're working for a group, maximize what you put away. Sounds almost like I know what I was talking about.
How do you recommend avoiding burnout?
That's a big issue now. And one of the problems, I think, is that people are so greedy that they're willing to work 80 hours a week to make a lot of money so they can show people how rich they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have time to live. They don't have time to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to live within your means, focus on your family,
Mm-hmm.
and plan me time.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't plan me time, put it into your schedule, you're gonna get into trouble. But nowadays, you get judged on how much money you make for the group,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we need to get away from that. We need to treat patients, not go after money,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to make sure we have time for ourselves and our families.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why some people go into ER.
Mm-hmm.
So some people go into derm
Mm-hmm.
because they see these other people working too hard and killing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're only working 8 or 10 hours a day in the ER and then you walk away, you don't have to worry about the patient that didn't make the diagnosis on, but you hand it off to someone. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's less stress from that.
What tips would you give us to establish more of a work-life balance? Or can you?
I think you have to focus on yourself and your family. You have to make sure that you give yourself and your family adequate time. If you got kids, remember one of the things my pediatric psychiatrist told us in medical school is when you get home, go straight to your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Give them 15, 20 minutes of your undivided attention.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all they need. I mean, oh my God, I don't want more than 20 minutes of my father's undivided time.
Mm-hmm.
But if they know they've got you for a certain amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
then that's a good relationship, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to do it regularly. They know they can count on it.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, okay, now it's time for me to. Now I've got to go read the newspaper or the charts or something.
How has medicine changed since you started practicing? And where do you see it going in the future?
Well, 30 years ago, I thought the public would get so annoyed at the way things were going that we would have had a major change in the way we practice medicine. I think the thing that bothers me more than anything else is we still have over 30 million people who are eligible for health care in the United States who aren't covered.
Mm-hmm.
And we still, I'm sure, have people who go bankrupt because they can't afford their health care.
Mm-hmm.
We need to take care of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And how we do that is something for the politicians to figure out. But in Canada, they pay a lot of extra in their taxes when they buy food, when they go to the restaurants, and they pay no extra as such for health care. When my daughter had an emergency C-section at 32 weeks in Montreal, her son was in the NICU for 4 weeks and then a step-down area for 2. She had a C-section. They came out and took out her staples. They didn't pay anything, not 1 penny extra. They paid for all of that in their taxes and stuff. They didn't pay for anything. It was covered.
Mm-hmm.
We have to figure out how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane that we have a country like ours that doesn't take care of its people. When I was going to medical school, and now I'll try and answer your question. When I was in medical school, I went to Tulane in New Orleans. New Orleans was segregated then.
Mm-hmm.
Charity Hospital had 1,200 beds.
Mm-hmm.
On even days, you came to the hospital, you got admitted to the LSU side. On the odd days, you came to the hospital, you got admitted to the Tulane side.
Mm-hmm.
So you had LSU side, Tulane side. Well, there was a black side and a white side.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a male side and a female side. There was no control or supervision. When I was a first week in medical school, I can remember going to the accident room in Charity Hospital and sewing up some poor guy's lip.
Mm-hmm.
My first week.
Yeah.
And there are several of us that spent a lot of time in the emergency room sewing people up.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing my first delivery. I remember seeing my first guy get killed. He had a knife into his heart. medical students could never do that now. And I think that's better because I had no supervision when I sewed that guy's lip up.
Mm-hmm.
The intern went down to nighttime dinner. Louisiana had a universal healthcare system, charity hospital system. If you didn't have any money, you went to charity hospital.
Mm-hmm.
They had charity hospitals in Shreveport, Monroe, Baton Rouge, Independence, and southwestern Louisiana. And the really sick ones would go by bus to New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
the Big Mother Charity Hospital, where they got pretty good care for free.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how it got paid for,
Mm-hmm.
but we did have that in Louisiana. And after Katrina, the governor got rid of the charity hospital system, for the good of it and the bad of it. Now I think people are just too greedy. We don't do house calls anymore. When my parents were patients, their doc would see them in the outpatient clinic and follow them if they went into the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have hospitalists.
Mm-hmm.
The continuity of care is not as good as it could be, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's easier on the primary care doc who doesn't go to the hospital because he or she does not have to worry about balancing all of that and coming in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's for the good or not. We have to learn how to hand off better, I think.
Okay, so would you choose the same career path again, or
it's been
would you do it differently?
It's been a great run. I'm so lucky that I fell into this
Mm-hmm.
area that I just I wouldn't change anything. I've had a great run.
And last question, what advice would you give us to become good doctors?
Focus on your patient, not on your money. I think we just have to take care of patients. I think we have to do it equitably. I think primary care people need to get more money. I think people like us in gastroenterology, we work a little more, we get a little more training, but I don't think that's worth 3 or 4 times
Mm-hmm.
what a primary care person gets.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of patients. Care about your patients.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Meyer, for being part of the interview.
Thanks, you had done.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions for Dr. Meyer, leave it down below in the comment section, and I'll ask him and maybe relay it back to you guys. Also, let me know who you'd like me to interview next. Thank you guys for watching, and have a great rest of your day.